千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. As always, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. So now let's go ahead and get into chapter 79 of the Daodejing. The Chinese title for this chapter is descriptive of its contents. The first character that you see there is left. That's the character to the left-hand side. The character in the middle is the character for contract. And then the character on the right is the character for chapter. So literally, this is the left contract chapter. The so-called left contract is actually the left part of a written loan agreement. The left part of the contract is held by the lender. And I'll talk about that process in great detail when we get to that part of the original text. And speaking of the original text, let's take a look. Daodejing, chapter 79. After settling a great dispute, there must be remaining resentments. How can this be considered good? Therefore, the sage holds the left part of the contract, but does not demand payment from the other person. Those who have virtue hold the contract. Those without virtue hold the collections. The Heavenly Tao has no favorites. It constantly gives to the kind people. Okay, we see this chapter goes from topic to topic. At first glance, it may not be very obvious exactly how these different topics are connected, but as we will see, it's all one big thing, one big topic. This chapter can be divided up into 4 sections, and those 4 sections look like this. Mostly, the 4 sections are composed of 2 lines each. And how do we identify the breaks? Well, we begin by looking for repeating characters, and we can see that line 1 and line 2 have the same character at the end. I've highlighted the translation as well. You can see here that the same character is translated differently. The first instance translated as dispute, second one translated as resentment. And that is because the character does carry that dual meaning, and we'll talk about that in just a few slides. Now, let's continue on looking for the repeating patterns. What other repeating patterns are there that we can see even without knowing ancient Chinese? Well, looking further down, we've got repeating pattern in line 6 and line 7. You can probably look at it and visually identify that the middle 2 characters are the same from line 6 to line 7. Let me highlight them for you. So now it should be easily visible. That second character, 德, that's virtue. And then the third character means to hold something. So on the right-hand side, you will see virtue and hold highlighted in red in corresponding fashion. So now we have the 4 sections identified. What do they say? Well, this chapter begins with the first section talking about disputes and resentments, and that this is not good. This cannot be considered good. It is a negative thing to have leftover remaining resentments that results from a great dispute. So that's how it starts. The second part, the second section about the sage holding the left part of the contract. As I mentioned at the beginning, the left part of the contract is held by the lender. So the sage, in a sense, is a lender. But then it says in line 5 that the sage does not demand payment, although the sage is the one who loaned out the money. And the money is not literal, it's basically spiritual currency, which just means wisdom. In the third section, we've got virtue, and then we've got the difference, which is contract and collections. Those who hold the contract, those are the ones with virtue, and those who hold the collections, those are the ones without virtue. And this is a statement about not just the lending process. The lending process is being used as a metaphor for the way that we interact with one another, the connections we make with one another, and the implication of the contract and collections with virtue. So in one scenario, you exhibit having virtue by holding the contract. In a different scenario, if you are collecting on past due payments, you are the one without virtue. So remember, this again is not actual. This is a metaphorical way of speaking. Lao Tzu is not advocating that people become delinquent with their loans because those who collect from them are without virtue, and therefore it is okay to not pay back. That isn't the point at all. The point is about the way we help one another and expecting some kind of reward or recognition. If so, that would be without virtue. So we'll get into that in great detail. The last section, without repeating characters. None of the characters repeat in the final section, which is line 8 and line 9. However, it is the most important section. It's the conclusion for this entire chapter. So with only 9 lines, it doesn't seem like a long chapter. However, it's very profound. So the last 2 lines is talking about the Heavenly Tao, and this is talking about the way the Tao works. And the last line, particularly important, constantly gives to the kind people. That's how the Tao works. And it's like when we say today that good karma comes back to you, multiplied many times. The ancient sages, 2,500 years ago, did not know about karma. Karma is a concept originating in India that the concept did not make its way to ancient China for centuries. So at the time this was written, there was no concept of karma. There was only the concept of the circular functioning of the Tao. So we'll explore that in detail as well. Now, let's go ahead and get into the first line. Line 1 says, after settling a great dispute. Let's break it down. The first character there, he, The pinyin looks like he. It's spelled exactly like the word he, but in the pinyin system, it is supposed to sound like he. And yes, it is a little confusing, but that's how the system is set up. Now, this character he in the line is translated as the second word, settling. To settle something is to harmonize the dispute. So let me talk about the meaning of this character. So first of all, there's the bullet point about he. That's the pinyin, sounds like he, as I mentioned, and the meaning there is harmony as a noun. As a verb, it means harmonize. So it can be used as a noun or verb depending on where in the sentence it is, depending on the context of the sentence. Now, the ancients regarded this as being the most important. They said in a number of different ways that harmony was above all. Harmony was central. Harmony was critical and essential. And this began in ancient China, but is spread outward to outlying regions affecting all other countries in Asia. And therefore, ever since ancient times, the importance of he, harmony or harmonize, has been emphasized across multiple Asian cultures. You will find references to that, cultural touchstones in Korean culture today, in Japanese culture today, and I'll provide some examples. But to the ancient Chinese, it was extremely important, and you can especially see how they would regard this concept, especially as they lived 2,500 years ago during the warring stage period. It seemed like just never-ending chaos and strife as one kingdom attacked another, and then some other kingdom is exacting revenge on a kingdom that had attacked it previously. Seemed like it was never-ending. Constant warfare, constant battles. So you can see how they would regard harmony as being extremely important. It was rare at the time that they lived, and therefore especially of great value due to its rarity. So let's talk about this whole concept of harmony. I want to touch on a couple of different aspects. The ancients felt that harmony within oneself was the most important of all, that you have to establish that inner harmony. You have to harmonize among the various conflicting thoughts, impulses that you may have before you can be harmonious with other people other than yourself. So then the next step after that will be harmony in the family, harmony with people in general, and eventually, if one is very well cultivated and has the ability, a natural ability to influence others, that harmony can hopefully spread out to cause the society itself to harmonize. So let's take a look. We can see the importance from the language. There are many concepts, many terms that start with this character, he. And perhaps one of the most common is 和平. And you see the pinyin there. The meaning of 和平 is peace. To have peace instead of war, chaos, and strife, great value to the ancients. Then we have another term here, 和谐. This means harmony. And you can see already with two examples that the first character is the same. It's the main character for harmony that is supplemented with another character for additional meaning. And then the next term, 和好. Now, It's a concatenation of two characters. The first one, as we talked about, means harmony or harmonize. And the second character there, hao, that just means good or well. So to harmonize so that everything is well, the meaning is to reconcile the difference between two parties, two or more. So reconciliation, especially after a dispute, after friction, contention, that is the meaning of this term, 和好. Again, we are continuing the pattern of the same character supplemented by another character for different kinds of meaning. In English, we have peace, harmony, reconciliation as three different words, and they don't seem to have anything on the word construction. They're not based on the same word roots, prefix, or suffix. They seem like completely different words on the surface. In Chinese, you can see that the three different terms, although the meaning is divergent, different, but related, the term itself shows the relationship by having the same first character. Now, I mentioned that the influence of ancient Chinese culture was such that outlying regions of ancient China also got the concept about harmony being incredibly important. So this is woven into cultural fabrics. We thus have the ancient Japanese culture being very influenced and affected by that, so much so that the dress, the clothing that they wore is known as he fu, where the first character is the same, fu, the second character is just clothing. And if we're talking about Japanese clothing, you can probably guess I'm talking about kimono. So the design of the kimono, it is meant to be a harmonious attire. That is the hidden meaning behind kimono. And not only that, it's not just clothing for the ancient Japanese that's been passed down through the generations to today. Today, hefu, the kimono, is considered a traditional dress. It is still in widespread use. If you were to visit Japan, you will see that people will once in a while put on the kimono just because. Sometimes a formal kimono can be worn to attend a formal event. It is not surprising in Japanese culture to attend some kind of formal event and see people attending dressed in kimono. Then, in addition to clothing, there's also 和室. This, the second character here, means room, a Japanese room. It is distinct. It's got the bamboo construction. It's got the mattress. It's where people can harmonize. So a Japanese room, it has its own identity. It's unlike any other room, any other design. You actually don't even find similar designs in other cultures. So this is very distinct, but the concept behind it, the harmony, the harmonizing aspect of it, it came from the ancient roots that we're talking about here today. Now, let's flip it around and look at the negative aspects of life. Harmony is the positive aspect, but then there's also discord. There's also lack of harmony. There's conflict. There's negativity manifesting as dispute. And that is the same character that you see there at the end of line 1 and line 2, yuan. So that's the pinyin there. It sounds pretty much like it's spelled. And the meaning is as follows. There are two parts to it. One, enmity, resentment. This is basically negative feelings. It's all about animosity. It's all about antagonism, bad blood. And the second part of it, to blame, to complain. So the two definitions, the two different parts of the meaning for this character results in slightly different translation, still talking about the same root negativity, but in English, they're represented differently. So this character represents negative emotions of contention, as well as other aspects. It is the clash between people as well as the animosity that we talked about. So how to approach this is that for the first instance in line 1 of this character, it's translated as dispute because there it's about clashing, arguing, fighting, and therefore it's a dispute. And then the character in the middle, right in front of it, is da, just means big, a big argument. And then in line 2, this is where we pivot to the emotional aspects, the antagonism, the bad blood, the bad feelings, the resentment. So that's the reason why these characters, even though the character is the same, they are translated in a slightly different way. The contextual meaning is different. Next, let's talk about the great dispute. So first of all, in ancient times, the great disputes might take a different form than modern times. It could be conflicts between warring kingdoms, as I mentioned. It could also be the oppression from a tyrant to the subjects, to the regular everyday people, the peasants. It could be the conflict between the subjects of a kingdom and the ruling class. So now, today, we know living in our modern world, in life, there will always be disagreement from time to time. It's just a fact of life. And the concept maps to different kinds of conflicts between ourselves and other people. Now, just like there will always be setbacks every now and then, we can expect that disagreements will erupt every now and then as we go through life. Sometimes it's just friction. Disagreement takes the form of friction. People having different opinions, they express them. It doesn't result in conflict. Other times, it can be a great dispute that occurs when the same friction blows up out of control. People become offended, they confront one another, and then before you know it, their volume gets louder and louder. Soon it's a shouting match. The shouting match evolves into pushing back and forth. Then maybe they come to blows. It could become physical. So things get out of control sometimes. Unfortunately, it does happen every now and then. So just a few examples on when we can expect this to occur in life. When multiple parties go after the same thing and clash. They all want the same thing, they won't back down, and therefore they clash with one another. You can already see from the first example that oftentimes greed can be the source of conflicts. It can be some sort of confrontation, maybe even without something that people are all going after. It could just be a fight. I have a friend who a long time ago got into a fist fight after a road rage incident. Traffic was moving slowly, and honking back and forth, gestures were exchanged. He got out of the vehicle, confronted the other driver, a fistfight ensued. That is a great dispute. And it wasn't that they were after the same thing, it was just a situation where neither one of them was willing to back down. Now, linking it together to the remaining parts of this chapter, it's going to talk about a lending agreement, a loan agreement. There can be a great dispute when someone defaults on a loan, is delinquent in the loan payment, is refusing to pay off the obligation incurred by having borrowed money. There again, greed can play a role. So regardless of the kind of great dispute, what Lao Tzu is saying here is that whenever you have things blown out of proportion, whenever you have things where people are really just against one another, it's a great dispute and it's a bad thing because, next line, there must be remaining resentments. That is to say, it doesn't matter how you resolve the dispute. It doesn't matter how you settle things. There's going to be resentments remaining from having disputed with one another. There will always be negativity regardless of resolution. As we go through life, we have seen this ourselves. We have observed other people when they have fights, when they make up, when they apologize, there is always a little bit of that remaining resentment that's still around. We like to say no hard feelings. We say things like, let's clear the air. We say that, but this is hardly ever absolutely true. We've seen it. We've felt it. When we ourselves get into conflicts with other people, you can kiss and make up, you can reconcile, you can shake hands on it, but there's always going to be that slight feeling. There's always going to be a little bit of a damage still remaining. And that's because we are human beings. Human nature being what it is, we cannot wipe the slate clean 100%. Always a little bit of that negativity left. It's true to life in general. Once something is broken, it can never be perfectly repaired. It would be difficult or impossible to get it perfectly back to the way it was before. And in the West, we sometimes use the example of the broken mirror. Once the mirror has been broken, it would be difficult, well, actually impossible to put it back together exactly like it was. Absolutely impossible. And in Western culture, we talk about Humpty Dumpty. Once Humpty Dumpty is broken, cannot be put back together again. In life, we know if you trusted someone, but that person betrayed the trust, later on, that person may apologize and promise to never do it again. But you know it'll be impossible to rebuild the trust to the way that it was before. So it's one of those things. This is one of the patterns in life that's being identified here by Lao Tzu. So let's move on to line 3. Line 3 says, how can this be considered good? So because of the impossibility of perfect resolution, perfect settlement, not possible. Perfect repair, not possible. Because of that, disputes cannot be good. Always a little bit of a bad thing. Now, in a different Tao perspective, you can say that there can be some good that you find in disputes because you can learn something from the dispute. You can learn, for instance, who is worthy or not worthy of trust. You can also learn Next time, how do you see a potential dispute that is brewing, that is on its way? How can I do a better job next time to see it coming from miles away so that I can avoid it? I can take proactive steps to ensure it doesn't happen. And that's an important point that we're going to return to in just a moment. Now, let's stick to this idea that disputes cannot be good. It's true for everyone. It's true for us. However much we cultivate the Tao, it is true that we can use the teachings of the Tao to help us resolve disputes. And there are many ideas and tools available. If we understand the Tao, we can utilize the Tao effectively, and we can be the master negotiator. We can be very skillfully settling a dispute. It is even possible to derive something good out of the dispute so that both parties are actually better off and happier than before. So the Tao makes that possible, but when we are using the Tao to resolve disputes, we have to keep one thing in mind. The resolution of this disputes is done with the realization that we have failed to prevent the disputes in the first place. And I mentioned that this is an important point. Prevention is important in the Tao. In the westernized version of the Tao, this doesn't get talked about very much, but in the Daodejing itself, it's extremely important. We talked about this in the previous chapter in 78. It is just as important in this one. And there are connections between 79 and 78, which is why this is showing up again. The concept is explained in detail in Daodejing chapter 64. It says, when it is peaceful, it is easy to maintain. When it shows no signs, it is easy to plan. When it is fragile, it is easy to break. When it is small, it is easy to scatter. Act on it when it has not yet begun. Treat it when it is not yet chaotic. Now that I'm talking about prevention, I think it's clear, it's easier to see. That's what these lines are talking about. The third and fourth line that you see there, when it is fragile, easy to break. When it is small, easy to scatter. It, in this case, is a potential problem. When the potential problem is still relatively small in the beginning stage, you can take care of it. And that's when we say preemptively cut the problem off at the pass, or sometimes we say you can nip it in the bud. So chapter 64 applies to every dispute, from the slightest friction that we have with other people to all-out fights, arguments, shouting match, etc. Tao cultivators who understand chapter 64 would look ahead, anticipate as much as possible, and then figure out what preventive measures can be done and do those preventive measures. So the whole idea is that if you can see something bad from far away, you can simply walk around. You can go in a different direction. If you sense trouble will happen if you continue in your current trajectory, it is relatively easy to make changes. You can diffuse a potentially contentious situation before it is even close to being explosive. The skillful Tao cultivator can do this long before other people even realize that there's a possibility of something bad occurring down the road. Let's continue on. We're now on to line 4, and the character that I want to focus on, first of all, is the last character in line 4. You're going to see that it's repeated again in line 6, also the last character there. in both line 4 and line 6, the character is translated the same way, the contract. So here's the pinyin, qi. So it sounds just like the qi in qigong, chi. It is, however, a different sound than what we usually call tai chi. Tai chi, the English term, is actually from the Chinese term tai ji. Tai ji, the second character there, is a J sound. It is written as chi in Tai Chi, a common word in English, only because of the older system of romanization mandated that it be romanized as ch, but pronounced with the J sound. Of course, people had no idea. It was only the academics who knew that chi was supposed to sound like ji. So everybody sees chi in Tai Chi, and they say it with the ch sound, Tai Chi in English. So just want to emphasize it's actually different, but the qi gong, that's a different character. It's not the ji character in Tai Ji. It's a different character. Qi means energy or breath. Here, same sound, qi, but it doesn't mean energy or breath. It means contract, deed, agreement, etc. There's a whole bunch more synonyms that are very similar to the definition that you see here, but we can stick with contract. Normally, this character is referring to a physical document that is legally binding. Usually something that's printed on paper that you have to sign. That's how things are today. Now, in this chapter, in the utilization that you see here in line 4 and also line 6, it's actually not something that's a physical document. The usage here retains the meaning of a covenant, but it's an agreement in the spiritual sense, like a spiritual contract. And as we go deeper into this line, I think you will see exactly what this is intended to convey. It's all about our connections with one another, our communication with one another, our companionship while on this life journey. And before we advance to the next slide, let me explain why Lao Tzu talked about it this way. Lao Tzu specifically was using this metaphor to talk about this aspect of life because he realized a great truth. The great truth was that the purpose of humanity, our purpose, your purpose, my purpose, everyone's ultimate purpose is to help one another. When you break it down to the absolute fundamental reality, to the basis of truth everywhere, our purpose here in this lifetime is to help one another. It is as if we are all living under this overall covenant of mutual assistance. So the overall covenant exists for all of us, and we have individual agreements with people, individual honoring of the covenant with other people when we help one another. So that's what it means. Now, let's get deeper into what it means to have the left part of the spiritual contract, spiritual covenant. It's time to talk about 左契, which is the left part. And you'll see the two characters that I've highlighted there. The character 左 literally means left, and then 契 is contract, as we talked about. The left part of the contract refers to the ancient system of tracking debts. This is truly ancient. This goes back to not just 5,000 years ago, but even longer than that. This is not just a system to track debts back in the time of Lao Tzu, 2,500 years ago. It goes back even further. And more than even 5,000 years ago, it predated the invention of language, and therefore it was most likely even further back, possibly as old as 10,000 years ago. The system of tracking debts was used even in primitive times before the invention of paper. And before we go too much further, I just want to let everybody know that my translation, Daodejing, annotated and explained in this particular chapter, there's a detailed description of how the ancient Chinese kept track of debts. So if you wanted something written that you can refer back to from time to time, I can point you to that. For now though, let me explain how the system works. Here are the main points. The left part is the lender's copy. So you create this written record of an agreement of a loan, money changing hands, and a promise to repay the money. Then you break it into two halves, the left part and the right part. The left part is the lender's copy, and the right part is the borrower's copy. So the two can go their separate ways. But by holding on to the left part of the contract, of the lending agreement, the left part entitles the lender to collect from the borrower. So the right part is a record for the borrower. The left part is the obligation of the borrower. Now, there are subtleties associated with this scheme that I want to explain. The explanation will likely take some time. So now is a logical time for us to stop for the halfway point in the meeting where we take a 5-minute break. So the first thing that I want to talk about before we get to the next slide is about the original form of this practice. This is a scheme that works on any writing surface. Originally, now we don't have any examples of ancient loan documents that was done in this fashion that's been passed down through the centuries. The speculation and references to this practice, we can guess that the very first instances of this kind of agreement might have been done with tree bark, a piece of bark from a tree. Then it could also work later on a piece of wood, bamboo, just anything that you could carve on with a knife to make marks to indicate certain things, indicate obligation. Later on, of course, you will have the same thing being done on a piece of paper, and then the paper will be torn down the middle to have the left half and the right half. So the basic idea, regardless of what it is done with, regardless of the writing medium, the basic idea is the same. If you have the left part, you have the right to demand payment from the person holding the right part. When the loan has been repaid, the left part is given to the borrower. The borrower, having the two parts together, now has the proof of payment. So that's the basic idea to keep in mind. Now, let's see a graphical explanation of the same. So here, what I'm doing is that I'm using parchment, and then I have the left part of it here, the right part of it here. And the reason why I needed to mention the possibility of wood, bamboo, tree bark, etc., is to emphasize that it didn't matter if we used something other than paper. Whatever can be torn down the middle will be usable. Now, the contents, the information about the loan is matching on the left and right. Whatever you have on the left, you also have on the right. And if the content matches, it is the proof of agreement. That is, both parties agree to the same thing. The information that would show up on both the left part and the right part contain, first of all, the specific details of the loan amount, how much money, when was the loan made, what are the terms of repayment, repay with interest, repay at a certain time, next season, next moon, whatever that is. Name of the lender, name of the borrower. So the information should be identical on both sides. So when they are brought together again, you can do a match from left to right, right to left. When they match, it is the proof that both sides had agreed to the same thing. The tier down the middle, well, when the two halves are brought together, they have to match too. That tier should not be even. Ideally, should be jagged so that you can have a match that proves the authenticity of the two halves, that they belong together, that it hasn't been forged. So this is ingenious. This is a brilliant solution in ancient times when the ability to validate a document could be limited by the lack of technology. So as I mentioned, the left part entitles the borrower to demand the payment, and when it's paid in full, the left part is given by the lender to the borrower. It's the receipt, payment receipt. Both parts together, held by the borrower, is the evidence that the obligation has been satisfied. Now, later on, when paper was invented, there's additional refinement. One thing that I should mention is the identifying part. Okay, so you see examples here of a personal name seal. This is like a personal stamp. So that's how the ancient Chinese would oftentimes do their signature. It is maybe a little surprising to us in the West, like, we would assume that they signed their name as well. In reality, very often, it is the stamp that is used in place of signature, and in modern times, it's both the signature and the stamp, oftentimes. So the personal stamps are still being used even today. The reason why they were invented in the distant past is because the ancient Chinese figured out pretty quickly that forging a stamp would be more troublesome and time-consuming and impractical than forging someone's signature. When I say it like that, when I point it out that way, it seems obvious. Like today, anyone can just copy another signature. Now we have other ways of validating transactions, so it's not a big problem for us. But for the ancient Chinese, they did figure out that if they were to create this as a requirement, so for instance, if you were a highly placed official, you would definitely validate the documents that you work on with a stamp like this. Seeing that stamp on a document, and you see many examples of that in, for instance, ancient Chinese painting. You'll see a stamp that looks kind of like this, and that's because the painter, the artist, was signing his work by using the stamp. Now, this system is, of course, not well known or used at all in the West. In ancient times, in the Western world, there was the seal that was applied to wax. So that was a good solution to validate the authenticity, validate that something that was held inside an envelope had not been tampered with. So that was a good solution. It's just that it lacks practicality in today's world. You and I are not likely to keep molten wax handy to seal documents. Nobody does it, pretty much. The difference is, today, personal stamps are being used. It comes in handy in a situation where the signer, the signatory, perhaps is illiterate, doesn't know writing, and therefore unable to write his or her name. In the West, we say, make your mark. It can just be a mark that you make with something that serves as signature. In Asian cultures, it's the stamp, which is a better solution, in my opinion. So moving right along, let's talk about the significance of holding the left contract. Before we leave the slide, please recall to mind that I'm showing a representation of a physical loan agreement here. But the contract spoken of by Lao Tzu in this chapter is not a physical thing. It's a mental metaphor. Let's explore that metaphor. Line 4. Therefore, the sage holds the left part of the contract. We have talked about how the lender, upon parting with some money to the borrower, holds the left part. For the sage, this is mapped to the sage helping people, dispensing not money, but some spiritual wisdom to a person who has come seeking help. So that's what is exchanging from one person to another in that scenario. Not money in that case, but perhaps something that is even more valuable than money. Sometimes money won't solve a particular problem, but the wise words of a truly wise person can point a path for you for which you will be extremely grateful. So bottom line, sages help people. People owe them a debt of gratitude. So the repayment in this particular case is not money either. A debt of gratitude, it just means that there's a possibility the people feel, I owe the sage. He helped me out so much when I was having trouble with my life. If one day I get a chance to repay his kindness, I'm going to do whatever I can to do that. So here, the basic idea to keep in mind is that the line says the sage holds the left part because of that wisdom transaction. Not monetary transaction, but the exchange of thoughts and ideas. This is why I say this contract exists only metaphorically in the mind. It does not exist as a physical document. It just means that the sages are entitled to some sort of payback, but the sages don't want any sort of payback. And the people that they have helped, they may say, well, I'm going to return the favor one day. Just you wait and see. And the sage would say, no need. And indeed, the sage will likely say, no need to return the favor, but if you can help other people, use your experience, having gone through this issue yourself, help other people when you see them go through the same problem, the same issue. So although the sages hold the left part of the contract, if it was really just a physical document of a loan agreement, then the person holding the left part will be expecting to the repayment of the loan. But the sages will not be demanding anything at all. Their purpose, their motivation for helping people is only because, well, it's the right thing to do. They're not looking to accumulate favors that people owe to them. Now, they will never demand payment for that. No need to recognize them. They don't have a need for recognition. They don't have a need to call in favors to anyone. And we see plenty of times in our own lives that there's going to be occasionally people reminding someone, hey, don't forget, you owe me. You owe me big time. You owe me a lot. All the favors I've done for you, I'm going to call them in. The sages, if they ask other people for help, they do so with no expectations. They are not going to remind them that, hey, remember I helped you before last year, so now it's your turn to help me. If they were to ask for help, it's relatively unlikely that they do, because the sages pride themselves in being as independent as possible. They want to be self-sufficient. They understand that in the Tao, in the underlying reality, revealed by self-nature of Zen Buddhism, the self, the true self, is sufficient in itself. We all have everything we need to overcome our challenges in this lifetime. The more you are in touch with that, the more independent you become, the less you need to get help from other people. And the sages would prefer to avoid that. They don't need to owe people any favors. They don't want to owe people any favors. Later on, someone may come back to them and call in a favor on them. They would prefer to avoid that if at all possible. Now, their preference will be for people to, in turn, help other people. Now, this is unlike what we see with those who are not familiar with Tao concepts. We can see from our daily observations that some people do actually help others with the notion to accumulate paybacks. Why? Because, well, someday it may come in handy when you really need a favor. You can call in those favors to get you out of a tight spot. Now, there's even more subtle ways of doing the same thing. You can occasionally observe people doing this. They will ask for help without explicitly mentioning or reminding the other person of previous help given. But you can tell they're asking for help with the expectation that the other person will remember previous assistance and therefore feel obligated. They don't need to say it, but you can see it in their expression, in their mannerism. They are expecting that the other person will say yes. Now, the sages, even though they hold the left part, people owe them, they don't collect on it, whereas many people that we encounter from day to day are definitely collecting past favors done for other people. Now, the sages believe, as you can see here, they want people to help other people. So this is the ancient Chinese expression of the idea to pay it forward. The ancient Chinese equivalent. We see pay it forward today. We think that it might be new, it might be uniquely Western. It is not. It's human nature. It's a good thing to do. And what we see in chapter 79 probably is historically the first clear expression of the same idea. Probably the very first expression in history. pay it forward. So here's how it can look using the picture that I shared with everyone, where the sage is holding the left part of the contract, metaphorical contract, and the person who came to the sage for help, who has been helped, holding the right part, and therefore the obligation to repay. The sage will say, you don't need to do that. What I would like you to do is to go out there and help other people. And if that person understands, that person will proceed with others, again, with the metaphorical contracts, holding the left part, helping other people, while other people hold the right part, being helped. So the sage not only provides the assistance, but also explains the Tao that this should be done. The person who was helped might have been inspired by the Tao and therefore emulate the sage, help other people in the same way, and hopefully inspire other people in turn. This can be very powerful. This can multiply even more. And if they, in turn, help other people, then you can imagine that it won't even fit in this slide anymore. And there's yet another factor. People aren't just taking actions to help others. That alone is a good thing. But it's not just the action of helping. People will also talk about this thing that's going on. That is, the stories of people helping people was spread. And when others hear about what's happening, they may be inspired. They themselves may initiate their own pay it forward just like this. So the effect can multiply pretty quickly. This is a recurring pattern in life. In the Tao, that's what we focus on. What are the recurring patterns in life? What can we learn from them? This works also because to pay it forward like this, to help other people, it speaks to the highest self within us. There is a conscience. There is the best part of you that upon hearing examples of this cannot help but feel motivated, inspired to take action. Because of the widespread impact, I often think of this not as this sequence that you see here, sort of like a expanding structure from the left to the right, because of the effect of communication, because we human beings talk to one another, because we talk about the things we find interesting. I see it more in terms of ripples, multiple ripples in a pond. And some ripples, upon hitting the edge of the pond, will be reflected back. So multiple ripples results. This speaks to the basic idea that we're all connected with one another. Therefore, everything we do has an effect on other people. Something that happens in one end of the pond has an effect on the other end, even though that effect may be tiny or unnoticeable, it's still there. Oftentimes, the ripples that we generate in life are not significant enough to be noticeable by many others. But when we follow the Tao, we begin to see how to create ripple effects that is of benefit to many people, that a ripple effect that has a farther reach and a longer lasting duration. And Once in a while, people who don't know the Tao can also create a ripple effect that affects many, has a very long reach and long-lasting duration. Occasionally, we get to witness such things, and it really restores one's faith in humanity. I have sampled some true stories from all over the world, all around the country. For instance, there is a pizza shop where the customers have the option, whenever they buy a pizza, they have the option, if they want, to purchase a $1 slice. When they have made that purchase, that coupon is affixed to a board. The $1 slice is meant for the homeless, the hungry. They can come to the pizza shop and take that coupon to redeem that $1 coupon for a slice of pizza, to maybe help them a little bit with the hunger. What I like a lot about this is that this scheme can be completely anonymous. That is, the coupons that is affixed to a corkboard, they don't need to have a name associated with them. In general, I prefer a scheme where the beneficiary has no way to repay the favor, because when people do favors for other people in expectation of payback, it lessens the authenticity of the compassion that went into wanting to help in the first place. I like it when there is no way that the recipient of the help can repay the favor, and if there are no names on the coupon, the homeless will not even know the identity of the person who has helped him or her with a slice of pizza. That's the whole idea. The pizza shop is hardly alone. In 2016, there was a pie shop that let customers pay for not just a slice of pie, but an entire pie for someone else. And these coupons are likewise posted on the wall, and they name the wall Pay It Forward, just a wordplay on Pay It Forward. So that's cool. Now, what we have talked about so far, the pizza shop and the pie shop, is something that is done as a side thing to the main activity. Main activity being to buy a whole pizza and then get a slice on the side, or buy a pie as the main purpose, the main activity, and then buy another pie to be posted on the wall. It doesn't need to manifest in that way. There are many other different possibilities. It can be, for instance, a chain. So in 2015, at a restaurant, there was a man who decided to pay for a meal at a restaurant for 6 high school kids. Now, those high school kids were not hungry or poor. They could afford their own meals, but the man was paying for them as a gesture of goodwill and kindness. The kids were so moved by this act that they asked to pay for the table's meal for the next day. So they went ahead and paid for that table as well, and it was recorded that total strangers sitting in that table the next day will have their meals paid for. And this in turn inspired the next set of beneficiaries. So the trend continued. Another 30 people did the same thing, forming a chain. And in 2014, there's a coffee shop that has a drive-through. People would drive their cars through the coffee shop, order a coffee, pay for that. So in this particular place in 2014, one customer driving through decided to not pay for just his or her own coffee, but also pay for the next car. And then the cashier accepted that, informed the next car, your coffee has already been paid for by the previous car. Now, there's no particular reason why, it's just a gesture of kindness. But then the person in the next car decided to do the same thing for the next car. And the same thing, the cashier informed the next car and the next and the next and the next. The chain continued for 11 hours. And altogether, 378 people were involved in that chain of paying it forward. Now, what we have talked about so far, pizza, pie, meal at a restaurant, coffee, these are all things that we can consume. These are physical, food, drinks, etc. that we can have. The only difference between what we're talking about now in this chapter is that we're talking about intangibles as well. It isn't just a piece of pizza or pie or a meal or a coffee that you can pay forward to someone. I'm talking about providing the Tao, sharing the Tao to other people so that it can benefit them in the hopes that they will pass it on to others in a chain, or as you see in the graphic here, in many ripples affecting other ripples. I cannot imagine something better than if we were to all be doing that. Next line. Line 5 says, but does not demand payment from the other person. This is talking about the sage not demanding payment from the other person despite holding the left part of the lending contract. We can now connect this line with the beginning of this chapter. So remember, the beginning of this chapter is about great disputes, that after settling a great disputes, there's negative feelings that remain. There's residual negativity. And we should then talk about how lending, which is the part we're talking about here, the left parts of the contract, the right parts, the repayment, how is that connected with disputes? Disputes can certainly come from the lending process. Common example, delinquency. The borrower may be tardy in paying back the loan or may not pay back the loan at all. That can result in a dispute in the typical loan, in a standard, regular, everyday loan. The two sides, the lender and the borrower, may have disagreements about specific details. And this is why, in modern times, loan documents are so exact. The language is precise. It is because of the importance of not leaving things up for interpretation. The more general or vague the verbiage turns out to be, the more room there is for disagreements about the specific details, leading to disputes. Most importantly, even if the details are clear on both sides, the borrowing, the lending can damage personal relationships. This happens all the time. This is extremely common. And this is human nature. This is East and West. This is all over the world, throughout all of human history. In the Western culture, this goes back, the understanding of this goes back centuries as well. And I want to bring up a quote from Hamlet from Shakespeare. In Hamlet, in that play, there's a wise older man, Polonius, who dispenses advice to younger men who are traveling afar. Polonius said, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend." So oft is often. Polonius says, don't borrow money and don't lend money. Do not be a borrower, do not be a lender either. Why? Because the loan will oftentimes result in the loss of the loan, money's not paid back, and friendship, loss of friendship. And that's indeed because of the possible disputes that we have here. So what happens if someone, maybe a good friend, were to ask to borrow something, some money? What if someone was to ask to borrow, as an example, $100? My recommendation is to give what you can as a gift. When I was asked to lend $100, I gave what I had, what I could part with. It was only $20. It wasn't as much as what my friend wanted, but the difference is I gave it as a gift. It wasn't a loan. So metaphorically, I have the left part of the lending agreement, but I will never collect on it because it was a gift. No repayment necessary. And to me, that was the best possible compromise of the situation. Now, I see that we are getting close to the end of our time together today, so I want to advance one more slide, and then we can summarize what we have talked about today. There's another side to think about. Why is it that the lending and the borrowing process results in the loss of friendship? Well, I mentioned that it's human nature. Unfortunately, the human nature is such that many people who need to borrow, it's basically a bottomless pit. It's never enough. You will hear things like, oh, this is the last time I'll need your help. It isn't. You may hear things like, just help me one last time. I'll never ask you for another dime. It's not true. At some point later, hey, guess what? I need one more. I just need one last help from you. Bottomless pit. You may hear, I never asked you for anything. Help me just this one time. Well, it's not just one time. If you set a precedent, the precedent is likely to be repeated. This is why Tao sages recommend that you help the people who are in an urgent situation where help immediately is necessary, but refrain from helping people who have a lack of resources. The reason is because those who are lacking resources can learn to become more resourceful. Whereas someone in a fix, in an urgent situation right now, may need help to get out of the emergency. So the expression in Chinese, 救急不救穷. So the poverty of the second part is more of a long-term condition, requires a long-term solution, whereas the emergency now requires a short-term, immediate solution. That is the distinction. Another problem that we can oftentimes see is that the borrower may take the lender for granted. That is, you are frequently helping someone out, but then the one time when you cannot help that person, it angers them. Why does it anger them? Well, you always helped me before. How come you can't help this time? Well, they have taken you for granted. You are being walked on like a carpet. So this is not a good situation. It is definitely something going to result in friction and maybe even a great dispute. That's why I say, again, borrowing, lending can damage personal relationships because of the previous 2 points. And if you end up with a dispute, even when that dispute is resolved, if you look at line 1, line 2, even when that is resolved, it is still negative. Therefore, that is the reason why sages are always willing to help, but they never collect. They recognize that lending, borrowing will result in a lack of harmony. So their goal is to increase the peace and harmony in life overall. So this is another important point for the sage. And now we need to jump ahead to the summary for today. Let's take a look at what we have talked about so far and identify the takeaways from this chapter. We've talked about the negativity resulting from disputes. We want to be aware that they exist. We want to figure out way in advance that the best possible solution is to anticipate and prevent. What if you cannot anticipate or prevent? Well, the next best thing is that if it was to happen, accept that there will always be some residual negativity. That's number one. Number two, we should emulate the way of the sages. How does that work? Well, sages observe nature. They note that nature expects nothing for all that it gives to us. Nature provides us with a place to live, sunlight, the breeze, water, sustenance. We can live because of what nature provides. Nature expects nothing in return. So sages, noting that, they also help other people the exact same way. They're sort of like the river that's quenching the thirst of all living things. But then the river moves on. Like a river, the sages continue in their flow. They move on to the next thing. They don't stick around to take credit or flaunt their achievement. We should emulate the sages as well. The sages emulate nature and the Tao. We should too. We must have the same clarity when we render assistance to other people. We want to be clear. What is my motivation? Am I helping to gratify my ego? Now, you may think that, oh, I never do that. I never help people to gratify my ego. Let me explain that it can be very common. For instance, the Chinese expression, 好为人师, it means someone who likes to be the teacher to others. Why? Because that person may think I'm helping them by dispensing knowledge to them, to explain things to them so they understand. They can't get this information anywhere else. They can only get it from me because of how knowledgeable I am. I hope you can see the ego gratification there. So we have to get clarity on our motivation. Hopefully, the motivation is I'm helping because it is the right thing to do. So practice the Tao of giving and helping. I'll have a lot more to say about this next time. And remember the process of paying it forward as you are helping people. Please share the Tao in the process of rendering assistance. Explain not just what you're doing, how you're helping, but also that the recipients of your help can in turn help other people, and that there's no need to pay you back. That would be the ideal. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.